Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about the Queen of Audio Q of A set. This is a collaboration with a singer whose name I will not try to pronounce or butcher, but this one is called Misty Blue. And I'll say if this is actually a real collaboration and she kind of okayed or contributed to this tuning, I'll say she has a super good year. Very really nice tuning, different than what I was actually expecting. I was expecting more of kind of the professional, really vocal forward style tuning. That's not what this one is, and we'll get into that in a second. But this is the box. These are all of the things that are in the box. There's actually quite a lot. So we'll start with the blue cable, which is really nice. This is a modular cable, so it's a screw-in modular. You can't do it with my left hand, but you can actually unscrew the jacket, and there's a 3.5 included. But yeah, super nice, kind of shiny blue. I think Q of A and Kinera does really nice cables. This one is no different. The shell does have one side, I think, has her name on it. One side does not. This is the QOA side. So a really nice resin shell. Again, that I think what's really kind of fascinating about this one is the design on it. It's really nice. I mean, the blue theme is kind of carried through all the way, but yeah, it is kind of a super nice sparkly blue, kind of a 3D-ish effect. Really nice. On the shells, you do get three sets of really nice tips. These are super wide bore. These are kind of wide bore-ish, and then these are kind of a 07 style tip as well. So 3 sets of silicone tips. You do get the mesh bag. You do get a really nice Q of A case, which kind of holds everything. And then again, so we can pull that out. You can actually see. So as I said, screw-in modular, which is something that you don't see all that often these days. You definitely see kind of the push-in variety. So it's nice that they gave you an updated or kind of a more higher end style of modular cable as well. So maybe we'll slide some of these things out of the way. We'll push these over to the side. I love mesh bags, so thank you for including those. This is the Queen of Audio canvas tote bag. If you actually go look at this, I think online they say if you're within some number of people who bought this, they include the canvas tote bag. That's what you are seeing right there. So when we take a look at the graph kind of right at the top, and I'll say, so what is, well, let's do this first. So what is it? It's about $220 right now. It appears to be on sale. It is a dual dynamic driver. There's a 10 and an 8 millimeter dynamic driver. 2 balanced armatures. One is a Knowles, one is a Q of A custom balanced armature. And when we look at the graph, I will say this one kind of resembles a couple other sets, the recent Q, Elysian Apostle, and how I would characterize these style of tunings and these, most of the sets that actually hit this tuning really very much appeal to me. So I kind of looked at the graph and I already know I'm going to like this set even without even hearing it, because what I would call this is, I used to call it the early rise but a low rise, and that's kind of what it is. And I think Elysian is probably most famous for doing this style tuning where you definitely rise a little bit earlier than the Harman style curve that we're really familiar with, but you cut across a lot lower than the Harman target, and that's kind of Q is really low, and then you had Apostle, which was a little bit more, and Misty Blue is kind of right along there, kind of at the upper side, and that's kind of the way it comes across. It does have this really nice bass shelf here, but what you hear is this very even, very linear, kind of a slightly forward treble that is the characteristic of Misty Blue. This is kind of right there to support that. Very nice balance. But those of you who aren't familiar with this early but low rise, that kind of gets away from that shouty peak that you had on Harman style tuning. The ones that kind of pop up at 2.5 or 3 kilohertz, and they, as you turn up the volume, they get a bit shouty. This style tuning kind of gets around that. And the downside of that is you don't have those over energetic female vocals. So if that's your thing, and when I first heard about this kind of collaboration with a professional singer, I thought, well, that's what it's going to sound like. You're going to see this big 2.5, 3 something peak, a lot of energy, this over energetic vocal energy. And that's not what this style is. It's almost the opposite of it. It's a very more natural style. It doesn't have a lot of forward energy on the vocals. Everything is balanced end to end. And it's a really, really nice set in that way. So what is this one really? I would say it's an under the radar. There aren't that many reviews of it. Not that many people tended to review this one, or not that many impressions online of it, but under the radar, very smooth, extended, nicely executed hybrid. It's a really, really nice set. And as I said, I just kind of looked at the graph. I knew I was going to like it. No different putting it in my ears. So do I like it? Yes. This is one of these rare hybrids that understood just because you have dual dynamic drivers, there was no need to overboost into boomy or bloated range. Provide a full sub bass, a mid bass lower to give two balanced armatures a more natural timbre. So that's what this bass. So this bass curve, when you look at it in the red, you're kind of like, well, that's either going to be a bass heavy set, or this is simply there to balance out all of that extension. And that's exactly how I would characterize it. It's providing kind of a nice sub bass, a nice mid bass, and those provide the foundation for the balanced armatures to make them come across as more natural and not so much be a timbre, but also to support the extension out there. And that's exactly what it does. And I would say that's really kind of an important part, is Misty Blue doesn't overdampen the balanced armatures. There's really nice level control, and there's a really nice support with the lower range, as I just talked about. Really well done for people who like hybrids with an edge. And that's sort of the problem with hybrids, is if you don't over dampen them, they tend to pop out a little bit, to be a little bit sharp, metallic, be a timbre, however you want to call it. You need kind of this fuller low end to kind of soften that, to make that sound more analog, to make that sound more organic, to make that sound more natural. That's exactly what this bass shelf is doing on Misty Blue. So again, really, really well done. They sort of understood what had to be done with these two particular balanced armatures, but not over dampen them to the point where they didn't sound, nicely separated and layered and technical and fast and all the things that you want a hybrid to sound like. They kept all of that, but just gave it a nice lower end to support that and kind of round it out and make it sound a little bit more analog than a typical balanced armature would sound. So yeah, really, really nicely done. And the sound, I will say, like other early but lower ear gain sets, it needs a little bit more volume to sound balanced. Again, this curve right here, whether it is on Misty Blue, Q, or Apostle, they all need a little bit more volume, because you don't have this big peak, this big forward energy on the vocals. You need to turn it up a little bit in volume. The graph says it's either going to be bassy or bright, like I talked about, but the answer is neither. It's a lower ear gain, this linear extended treble with a lower range to support that extension. Again, not a typical way to tune, but this is a tuning that I particularly like. It's just not a bass-led tune. And again, as you look at this, you're like, well, this could actually be a bass-led set. It has kind of a nice bass curve there, but I would say no, it's not. It's really there to support the upper end. And bass-led genres are actually kind of okay, but it's not that type of set. If your primary concern is bass and bass forwardness, it's not that type of set. This is really there to support that. So, and again, I'll say, while the upper treble looks peaky, the pushed upper treble, it's really done really well. Again, this looks kind of wacky the way it all measures. It looks really peaky, and you think it's going to be bright or it's going to have some bright spots, but it doesn't. It's just kind of just the way it measured. But this actually sounds very much linear and balanced all the way out through extension. So the bass, again, the goal here is to provide that sub bass, mid bass without stepping out of place, right? As I said, this whole curve is there to support that. This couldn't step out of place. It couldn't be a distraction. It shouldn't boom. It shouldn't bloat. It is simply there to make this sound more natural. That's exactly what this bass shelf does. The lack of boost kind of makes it almost transparent and neutral. It's not quite neutral. I would say it's slightly boosted. Especially if you have a track with bass, it definitely comes across as slightly boosted. It's there when it needs to be, and that's kind of how I would describe it. But it also provides a really smooth transition into those natural mids. It's the opposite of most contrasty sets, which makes it kind of unique. So we have a lot of sets that raise the sub bass out here. They dip the mid bass down to the bottom floor, and then they push this up, and you end up with this very kind of a lot of boost here, a lot of boost here, and not much in the middle. And that ends up being very contrasty, is how they would say it. This is sort of the opposite, where you kind of carry the bass shelf in and it creates this very smooth transition end to end. And people look at it like, oh, this is going to be all super muddy and you're not going to have any vocal clarity and all that. That's not what happens when you use really nice drivers. Exactly what Q of A did here. You can pull off a mid bass boost. You can pull off a sub bass boost, but they need to be very controlled. You have to have a dynamic driver that has kind of a tightness and a tautness to it. That's what they use on these particular dual dynamic drivers. This works really, really well with hybrids if you do it right with really nice drivers. That's exactly what they did. There was no need to do this contrasty, bring the mid bass down to 0. They didn't have to do that because they used nice drivers. And on the mids, I'll say again, I like my hybrids to have a slight BA edge to it. Some people will call that BA timbre. I just call it BA edge. You get really nice vocal clarity that you get from most hybrids. But what Misty Blue does better is balancing that edge with that full lower mids. It gives Misty Blue a very refined sound for the price. So again, why does Misty Blue sound a little bit different from those contrasty sets that I just talked about? Those sets tend to boost this and they boost that, and you end up with this really hard edge on the hybrids because you don't have a smooth transition. You don't have the support from the lower mids. You don't have the mid bass to give everything kind of a more refined sound. That's exactly what Misty Blue did, and that's kind of why I said it sounds a little bit different than other sets kind of at the same price point. It has more of a refined edge for the price. This move is one that I kind of appreciate. I kind of love when it's done really right. I love when it's done with really nice drivers. Misty Blue, again, I'll say it's kind of an under-the-radar set for that reason. And yes, you can have clear vocals with the mid-bass, as I was talking about, if you use a faster dynamic driver, tune them properly with a lot of control. It brings the resonance, which is really hard to find. You know, that deep, full sound, that richness that you get from having a little bit of mid bass. That's exactly what they did. You need that on a hybrid because, again, otherwise it comes across as very contrasty. You kind of have this and this with nothing in the middle. When you transition and have that resonant sound to it that sounds deep and full and rich, again, it sounds a little bit different than your typical set. And that's what I would say about Misty Blue. It just sounds a little bit more refined, a little bit deeper, a little bit richer than your typical hybrid that's about $220. And on the treble, I'll say, yeah, the graph looks a little bit peaky, but it's the opposite. It's really nice linear extension. It's not bright, it's not peaky, but there's lots of extension. And when you combine that with that bass control, it just gives you really nice hybrid mids. Much like the bass, the treble is there, controlled, not boosted. It's really tuned for balance. Again, they pulled off a really nice balance, and I'll say the graph doesn't really do it justice. This part looks really dead on. This part looks a little bit too peaky, a little bit too bright. That's not the way it comes off in your ear. BA timbre, as I said, the edge, hard to avoid with two balanced armatures, but you do it through level control. And again, ignore the peaks. It's kind of a linear level control. They didn't push it too hard to the point where it sounded really metallic. It just has a really nice edge that makes you think that, hey, I'm actually listening to a hybrid. And this has a really nice full low end, and the two combine into a really, really nice sound for people who appreciate that style of hybrid. Might it be called boring? Again, I'll say, yeah, it probably is, because it doesn't have that high energetic kind of engagement to it that you have in some other peakier sets, some other brighter sets that kind of pull you in with treble. This one is kind of a linear end-to-end, slightly neutral, not really high on engagement, but that is what people who are really into mids, and I kind of said that the mids are kind of the star here, the way the bass and the treble kind of contribute to the mids. This one is for mids people, and it's, again, I'll say it's kind of surprising that her ear, if she kind of contributed to this style tuning. It's kind of a more advanced, kind of more expensive style IAM style tuning that you don't find at this price point. But when you hear her, you're like, yeah, that's really, really well done. So kind of, if she had a whole lot of say in on the tuning, like, yeah, very, very good. A lot of props to her ear because it's done really, really well. So the stage and the imaging, again, done very, very well with this tuning. Not going to be all that surprising. Lots of nice tuning, upper range control. Everything is really good. It actually images better. It's probably more 3D than you think it's going to be. There are definitely moments where you're like, whoa, that instrument's coming from way up high and left. All of that is done really, really well, again, through a lot of control, a lot of extension, some really nice drivers on the low end. Again, I'll say, all around, Misty Blue is a really, really nice under the radar set that was kind of surprising that more people hadn't had a chance to listen to it and appreciate it as much as I did. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.